Before we begin, let's take a brief moment to remember Marvel's greatest fallen villain. Thanos, my mad titan, you truly were inevitable. Rest in peace. Or ashes, I guess. As sad as it is to see Thanos go, it's also exciting to know that a new villain is on the way. One who is worthy of filling in as the MCU's new big bad. Marvel announced not too long ago that Kang the Conqueror would make his MCU arrival in the newest Ant-Man film. Lovecraft Country star Jonanthan Majors will take a break from Lovecraftian weirdness to give us time travel weirdness. You see, this news has pretty much blown up the internet because not only is he one of Marvel's greatest villains, but he's also one of the craziest as well. Kang is a time-traveling megalomaniac who is actually several characters in the Marvel Universe because of time-hopping shenanigans. All you really need to know for these purposes is that he is a blue-faced bad guy who considers himself to be a Napoleon or Alexander the Great-style conqueror. He is from the far future, and he uses his knowledge of history and his advanced tech to frequently attack the past. So, as far as powers go, let's break it down really quickly. For starters, we need to acknowledge that Kang isn't the most consistent of comic book villains in terms of power level. When you see the Green Goblin, you pretty much know what you're gonna get. He's got pumpkin bombs, a glider, super strength, and is super crazy. With Kang, things aren't so simple. It doesn't help that Kang has changed his fighting style, his favorite weapons, and very identity several times during his life. The iconic aspects about Kang that they will no doubt focus on in the MCU are his time chair and his battle armor. The time chair is a device that, you guessed it, allows him to travel through space and time. Knowing how the MCU likes everything to be connected, it will likely work using Pym particles to shrink into the quantum realm in a similar fashion to Endgame's time travel. Then there's Kang's battle armor, which gives him his iconic blue fleece and purple-green color scheme. This armor is also responsible for most of Kang's powers like enhanced strength, force fields, holograms, and technological manipulation. He also has access to technologies from across all of human history. Whatever sort of futuristic weapon you can imagine, Kang likely has access to it. He also has conquered multiple timelines in the future, including the city of Chronopolis, which actually exists outside of time. So, like Thanos, he has access to huge armies that he can deploy very quickly. As far as the MCU goes, there's really nothing stopping him from using any weapon or army in MCU history. He could even potentially use the Avengers plan in Endgame to get his own Infinity Gauntlet. None of that is Kang's greatest asset, though. That would be his brilliant tactical mind. As a scholar of history, Kang knows more about his enemies than they do about themselves. He frequently picks what he considers to be the most opportune times to go after the Avengers. This has even led to him actually taking over the world, albeit briefly. While his brilliant intellect is his greatest strength, it's his ambition that is his greatest weakness. You see, like Napoleon or Alexander before him, Kang's reach exceeds his grasp. His desire to destroy the Avengers and conquer all of time is just insanity. It is a goal that he has absolutely no hope of achieving. Still, he presses on, all too eager to try his hand at time conquering no matter how many times he loses. Seriously, man, you could pick any time to conquer. Why spend so much energy on the timeline that has the freaking Avengers in it? To his credit, he does eventually retire to return to his nice, quiet life of ruling ancient Egypt with an iron fist. I mean, that's essentially the time-traveling warlord equivalent of a 401k. So, with so much unbelievable power and such a believable weakness, Kang is obviously the perfect follow-up after Thanos, right? Well, let's take a look back on the Big Purple supervillain and see how the new guy stacks up. Thanos was the MCU's most hyped villain, and when he arrived, he didn't disappoint. He was the single most iconic movie villain since Voldemort, who also turned into ashes at the end of the Harry Potter series. As much as we love Thanos, now that his run is over, was he actually as great of a villain as we remember? We know that Thanos was a person from the planet Titan who believed that in order for the survival of life, half of it would have to be eradicated to save precious resources. For this belief, Titan banished him only to prove him right years later. After the destruction of his homeworld, Thanos spent an undisclosed number of years amassing a vast cosmic power so that he could see his work completed. At some point along the way, he discovered the Infinity Stones and decided to use them to complete his goal with a snap of his fingers. While we see a few glimpses of Thanos leading armies in the days before Infinity War, most of his time in the MCU is spent delegating other villains like Loki and Ronan to little success. There are many theories that suggest the Nova Corps, the Ancient One, or King Odin were standing in Thanos' way, but he didn't take a personal role in his quest until Infinity War. Once he did, he pretty much got the job done within like a week. Seriously, if you're bad enough to drop the Hulk without even using the Power Stone, why even bother with the henchman? Now, as far as his powers go, Thanos is a brutal warrior. We see him fight twice without using the stones, and he is an absolute powerhouse. He is much stronger than the Hulk, has a double-bladed sword made of Uru that makes Darth Maul's double lightsaber look puny, and he is so skilled that he took on Thor, Cap, and Tony without much effort. That being said, despite clearly having access to some highly advanced technology, he still fights like he is the biggest boss in Ghost of Tsushima instead of a high-tech warlord. Giant swords are cool and all. We all love Final Fantasy II, Thanos, but they just aren't the most efficient weapons out there. Once he had the gauntlet, though, he was on a whole other level. Thanos was able to amass all the stones by running through most of the MCU with ease. While Mantis, Scarlet Witch, and inevitably Thor held him back, he ended up succeeding in exactly what he set out to accomplish. Really, this is the prime difference between Thanos and Kang. While Kang sets out to conquer a wide empire across time and space, Thanos has a more achievable goal. Well, achievable by sci-fi megalomaniac supervillain standards anyway. Once Thanos succeeds in Infinity War, he gives up his power and lives the short remainder of his life in exile. Even when he loses an Endgame, he merely sits down and accepts defeat instead of fighting a battle he cannot win. That being said, Thanos' plan was
not a great plan.
Kang is a tactical genius who will often pull a reverse Doctor Strange by deeply analyzing the past to find every angle of attack he can. He frequently arrives with the exact strategy needed to defeat the Avengers. You know, until they come back and beat him up because it is their comic after all. Thanos, however, never seemed to even consider that he could go about his plan in a different manner. With infinite power comes infinite variation. Thanos easily could have granted the universe unending resources or erased the need for hunger in the first place. Even Gamora tried in vain to get him to see a different path, but he could not. Unfortunately, this fatal flaw kept him from becoming the galaxy's savior as he intended, but instead made him the galaxy's greatest monster. So, was he as great a villain as we remember? Yes, he most certainly was. I'm sorry, Kang, but you got your work cut out for you. Now is the time to stack these two comic book behemoths against each other to fully determine if Kang really has a shot at following Thanos as the next iconic MCU baddie. So, first off, let's compare how much of a physical threat these two are. At first glance, you'd probably be tempted to make this an easy win for Thanos, and it isn't hard to see why. Even without the Infinity Stones, Thanos is one of the most formidable characters in the entire universe. No single character has been able to take on so many MCU heroes with such great success. That being said, once he meets a force greater than his own, that's pretty much it for him. At the end of Endgame, Thanos was nearly undone by both Scarlet Witch and Captain Marvel. Both managed to overpower him easily, and if it weren't for the Gauntlet or his impressive army, he would have lost before Iron Man even had a chance to get the stones. For Kang, however, this isn't such an easy assessment. While Kang is certainly a formidable hand-to-hand combatant, it's clear that he's no Thanos. It's entirely possible that the MCU will have no one who can throw hands quite like the Mad Titan ever again. Though the throwing of said hands isn't exactly the smartest way of fighting, Kang isn't one for just matching brute force with brute force. He often uses a variety of gadgets and futuristic weapons to discover the weaknesses of his foes. It's even likely that he could take on a more powerful enemy and figure out a way to defeat them through means other than punching. So while the comic book Thanos would take this by a mile, I think Kang could outdo the MCU Thanos in any physical confrontation. Point Kang. Now, as far as Machiavellian schemes go, let's start with Kang. By all accounts, Kang is one of the most successful villains in the Marvel Universe. He has frequently conquered vast empires and has bested the Avengers on multiple occasions. Using his vast knowledge of time, Kang is able to anticipate what his enemies will do and plan for endless contingencies using tech you or I couldn't even dream of. Thanos, on the other hand, doesn't seem to be the best planner out there. He frequently relies on untrustworthy allies like Loki or Ronan to do his dirty work, who both fail him through personal flaws that should have been obvious. Now sure, you could argue that Thanos was using them as pawns to test the water, but that seems unlikely. If anything, he just gave away what his plans were by having them prematurely attempt to gather the stones. However, once Thanos set about the task himself, he was successful in a way perhaps no other movie villain ever has been. Thanos was able to wipe out half of the universe, achieving the exact goal he set out to years earlier. Darth Vader never took over the Empire or the galaxy. The Joker never destroyed Gotham City. Agent Smith never succeeded in being relevant again after the first Matrix. Thanos won. This kind of thinking shows that Thanos is actually the better evil genius. While his individual plans may not be as sound and his thesis about wiping out half of all life is crazy, he did find a way to succeed at achieving exactly what he meant to. Spoiler alert, but Kang is never going to conquer all of time in the MCU. Especially not that decade with all the superheroes in it. So this is a point for Thanos. As far as icon status goes, well, time will have to tell. Thanos certainly proved to be a memorable villain. His performance by Josh Brolin and the wonderful special effects that brought him to life will likely make him endure in pop culture for decades to come. Kang, however, has a rough road ahead of him. Not only does he have to follow the most iconic MCU villain, but he also has to contend with a particularly confusing backstory. Though, I gotta say, Jonanthan Majors is a brilliant actor who could very well give us a performance that makes us say, Thanos who? While it won't be easy by any measure, I think Kang has what it takes to stand alongside Thanos as one of the all-time greats. If not, let's just hope that he's at least better than Malekith. The world doesn't need another Malekith. Well, there you have it. Why Kang is the successor MCU fans deserve. What do you guys think about the new villain? Do you think he has what it takes, or do you think Galactus or Doctor Doom would be better? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to CBR.